Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability. My name is Jade Margaret from Southwest University and Global University for Sustainability. We provide Portuguese, English, and Chinese simultaneous interpretation. You can find a group icon of interpretation selection at the bottom of your computer screen. We would like to thank today's interpreters, Paula Parisotto, Jacqueline Machado, Huang Xiaomei, Dong Hanyu, and Pei Haitong. Apart from Zoom webinar, we do live streaming on Bilibili, which is a very popular social media platform in China. There are thousands of young followers who are interested in world politics and eager to learn alternative thought and experience. In the past 3 years, we organized 3 lecture series: Venezuela in Struggles, Colonial Past, Revolutionary Legacy, and Community Regeneration, Experience with Indigenous Communities in Chiapas, Cosmovision and Sustainability, African People's Struggles for Liberation. Now we are running 2 new lecture series. One is Rojava, Resilience and Renewal, Democratic Confederalism and the Changing Face of Revolution. And the other is Constructing Alternative Paradigms in Brazil. All videos are recorded and uploaded to the website of Global University. I typed the links in the chat room for your reference later. The Brazil series are co-organized by Global University for Sustainability, CCRD-CS, Lingnan University, PPGPS, Federal University of Espírito Santo, Institute for Rural Revitalization Strategy, Southwest University, and Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives. We invite Brazilian scholars and activists to discuss, debate, and explore how to construct alternative paradigms in Brazil and Latin America. The topics include political economy, liberation theology, participatory budgeting, liberation pedagogy, food sovereignty, agroecology, climate justice, Rainforest Alliance, community currency, Latin America integration, among others. We have already organized 4 lectures about the dependency of Brazilian economy, agrarian question, food sovereignty, agroecology, women participation in social change, and indigenous people's struggle, and Amazon perspective. You can find the video links of the previous lectures in the Global U website. Now, we are happy to have the lecture 5, Experience of Participatory Budgeting in Porto Alegre and Campinas. Let me introduce the first speaker, Anjuli Tostes Faria Melo. She holds a postgraduate degree in public management from the Cardinal Mendes University. She also works professionally as a lawyer and a federal auditor of finance and control at the Office of the Comptroller General of Brazil, where she has worked with development of social participation mechanism. She was a member of the Commission of Human Rights and Labor Law of the Brazilian Bar Association, Federal District Sessional. She is currently a member of the International Relations Secretariat of the Brazilian Association of Jurists for Democracy from 2020 to now. Please, thank you very much.
I would like to thank the Global U for the dialogue, South-South for the invitation, and University, the Global University Institute for Rural Strategies também o exchange. I would like to thank and also greet our friend Isalene Tieni, Mayor of Campinas from 2001 to 2004, did a great job, and also greet Renata Simões, National Secretary of Social Participation, and Secretariat of the Commission, and Ubiratan de Souza, Director of Participative Budget in the Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic. I would like to thank Jade Tsui for the mediation, and a special thank you to our interpreters, Jacqueline and Paula. In my presentation, I'm going to have an approach of the current state of the participative budget here in Brazil. One of the main sources, I'm going to use the World Atlas. Although it's from 2019, it continues being the greatest compilation of data ever made on the situation of the planet. Also including the diagnosis once it's specialized in the topic about active democracy, and from authors such as authors from China, and the pleasure to have a class and study deeply mechanisms of deliberative democracy as a reference in Brazil. These are the main references I'm going to use today. I'm going to start by speaking about what the Brazilian Institute of Participative Budget is. It's a very relevant experience of popular economy. It emerged in Porto Alegre. It was founded there in 1989 and was multiplied thousands of cities and 6 continents since then. The participative budget is a democratic mechanism where citizens may decide directly with the right to define mechanisms for deliberative democracy, the destination of public resources. And the design of this participative budget is concerned about including populations that are historically vulnerable and marginalized, also related to things that affect directly these populations. The logic behind the participative budget, with a design that was built in 1989 in Porto Alegre, is to cause an increase in public services for communities, low-income communities. It presents characteristics that are different and unique and are materialized with very important. If we consider these initiatives at a global level or even in Brazil, but represents different, although these distinctions of participative budgets, there are 3 elements that we can use to categorize this experience. The first is the definition of a proportion of the budget that will be submitted to citizens. The second element is the participation and realization of assemblies and meetings for discussion, deliberation, and society about the allocation of budgets. And the other one is to be free and independent participation. So these are what literature that was consulted. This is basic material, so we can participate in this experience. Second is we have the catalog of at least 11,900 participative budgets of tens of countries, including 30 years. So this diffusion, the spreading of the Institute and to the most different contexts, implemented in 71 countries, and it overcomes the most optimistic forecasts. Although this continues to grow globally, this expansion is asymmetric. In Latin America, the participative budget suffered processes, especially in Brazil, where we had interventions in most of the experiences. The abandonment of participative budgets in many municipalities, even nationally, placed a bit before the coup of 2016, and there was a substantive reduction for the quantity of processes in place, trying to change the deliberative form of the processes. We are going to hear today by much qualified individuals who took part in Porto Alegre, was a pioneer spreading to the world. We have Ubiratan, who is going to speak about it, and also in Campinas, which will be presented by Iselene, who was mayor coordinator of the participative budget and mayor from 2001 to 2004, when this budget was installed. First of all, by the management of Tony, and after his death, it was Iselene. But these experiences that were very special and significant in terms of social participation, as others in the country, many others suffered great backlashes in the last years. In the city of Porto Alegre, the participative budget continues to exist formally and uninterruptedly since 1989, despite the change in the political party leading municipality. However, there was a great reduction of the binding character in these decisions, and also the field. So the parcel today put in discussion is very little expressive, counting on so many in the city of Porto Alegre. Something around 10 million in some participate. This is very little considering the size of the city of Porto Alegre. In the city of Campinas, in the state of São Paulo, the implementation of the participative budget from Mayor Toninho and then Isalini. This is very important for the participative budget. There's a political commitment that are ahead of the municipality. The other one from 2004. But after that, the following governments presented a great reduction at the level of this engagement. This was a great impact for the deliberative quality of the process. You will know in more detail about these experiences. I won't touch upon them now. I think they were protagonists in the process. It has to be more embracing and what a participative
budget. What is
participation
the participatory
is.
movement in
It's
Brazil?
hard
It's
to
difficult
name any other
other
institute
institute
with a similar
with
capacity
similar
of changing.
So I said that it's difficult to name other institute of other nature that has this flexibility and capacity of be adequate to political, economic, and cultural movement as participatory movement. This movement was in the World Social Forum that had one of the most effective vehicle. Another element that made this dissemination to prosper, it was this participatory movement in international agencies as a democratic and shared technology. I told you that the differences of participatory experiences, they are different from each other. Of course, there are 3 points that you have convergent points, common points that allow us to be in the same category, but you have other type of differences. It differs in terms of population involved, in terms of the territorial comprehensiveness, institutional and political in each context. And the implementation of the participatory budget, it is seen as having the main purposes. I will tell you some of those based on a survey done on the report of managers and in the experiences as well. There are some purposes. And we had also a survey based on the data of these experiences by the Atlas of the participatory budget. So the objectives would be the promotion and the participation of the stakeholders, the confidence of the institutions and the population, the equality in terms of equity to have the process of decision-making, the reinforcement of the citizens' power together with the institutions, the inclusion of the vulnerable groups historically made, and you have a good governance, inclusion, the transparency of the institutions, the improvement of the effectiveness and the efficacy of the management, the combat of corruptions with the political public policies, the redistributions of the public inputs, promoting more social justice, the promotion of dialogue between the public administrations and the citizenship, and then at last, the deepness of the democracy, the close relationship with the democracy. All these purposes goes towards the high density democracy, as Professor Boaventura says. The democracy that includes listen, co-create together with the society. The radical democracy organized by plural processes and horizontal processes. The participatory movement is in this end of have a dense democracy. I will close my explanation, but I have some challenges to share with you, the challenges that you have in Brazil, and you have the time of questions and answers, and then you can talk about these collectively. So let's see the challenges. So we have the studies that you have the correlations among the experiences of participatory budget and the increase of the social welfare, with the follow-up and the more systematic analysis on the municipalities that implement the institute in the past. And in this sense, you have the engagement, a deeper engagement of the academy, the university. This is very important. And your role here that are participating in this debate, space is more relevant in this process. The second challenge that I would like to share with you is regarding the improvement of the mechanisms to dialogue more effectively with the way of life of the traditional societies, communities, like indigenous community. You told here that you had a lecture in the past about experiences of the indigenous people in Chiapas. My doctorship thesis has the field work, the Caracolas Batistas in Chiapas. I was there for 2 months visiting and learning a bit of Tot in one of the most popular languages spoken there. And they have the Chiapas in Brazil, they have indigenous population that share a very rich cosmovision. And it's necessary that the participatory budget go into depth in terms of dialogue with this paradigm. So we have this community be included in the decision-making about the prioritization and the resources allocations and policies and the public services that impact directly their lives. In Mexico, this is very relevant, especially when you have a big entrepreneurship undertaking. So the dialogue must be more comprehensive, deeper, and in Brazil, you have this mission ahead to accomplish. The democratic government must potentialize the expression of these cosmovisions in the dispute, and because you have this destructive paradigm in force that the current capitalist system represents. As you are talking about to build alternative paradigms, this is a challenge that I share with you. The third challenge allocated is the rescue to have back in the regions, and here in Brazil, the one that you have a drawback in terms of the participatory budget. We had 27 years from 89 to 2019 were in the leadership with the participatory budget, but you had a drawback, backward. In 2015, 2016, it is being studied and you are trying to diagnose and assess in our applied economical institute and by the universities. But what I'd like to point out is that you have a mission as a talent to have back the participatory movement back. This is a way that we are restarting the process with the Lula government. So you have the social participation in the creation of a pluriannual plan from 2024 to 2027. We have this process until 2016, but now we were restarting it again. The annual plural plan, it's participatory. Just to know about this tool, this is the main tool of budget planning in a medium term on behalf of the federal government perspective, where they have the objectives, the goals, and the programs of the federal government for these 4 years on. And we are starting it in a level, in a dimension has never seen before. In the construction of the annual pluri-plan, we have ample participations with all the capitals of the country. They are open, they are free. We are in this place as an assistance of social participation. We have a system implemented now that articulate initiatives in all the government perspective. And we have the civil society getting subsidies in the territory. And I bring here a special breaking news to you. Just finish my talk. We are going to have, in the first time in history, the participatory budget in a federal level in 2024 in Brazil. It was announced by the President of the Republic. The construction is being done by the level of the annual pluriannual plan. In a federal perspective, it is taken into account by the General Secretariat of the Presidents of the Republic, and you have the role of coordinating this participation. Renato Simões is the National Secretary of the Presidents of Republic. Ubiratan, that he is from the same Secretariat, they are doing a wonderful work to have the social participation back. And our desire is that this process can be contagious and create a chain perspective, a spiral perspective in a state and municipal levels. And another desire that this process of restart can empower the exchange and the cooperation South-South with this aspect of dialogue, so you reaching that you are having today. So we're going to hear from China, Hong Kong. It will be a pleasure to exchange ideas and understanding with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anjuli, your presentation. And you give us a general picture about the participatory budgeting in Brazil and the current situation, the significance of this method in today Brazil. And now we will have second speakers, Isolani Tianin She was a public servant in public health and professor in social work at the Salesian University Center of São Paulo. She actively participated into the basic elastical communities and the popular movement. She was mayor of Campinas for the Workers' Party from 2001 to 2004. She worked for a missionary in the Amazon sent by the National Conference of Bishops of Brazil, South One, from 2012 to 2018. Today, she is retired, but she remains an activist in the popular women's movement and participates into the municipal directory of the Workers' Party in Campinas. Thank you very much, Iselene.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be starting again the experience that you had in Campinas. And it's great to talk after Anjuli, because she had a wonderful presentation. We had a possibility to disclosure in a very comprehensive way to implement, as well as what you left in 2004. The experience goes from 2001 to 2004. When you have the experience in Porto Alegre, we started presenting the process and the proposal of the budget in Campinas with the leaderships that were working with a relationship that it was not even at all with the public power, because all the claims that were sent didn't have any feedback from the authorities. And it was a process that he worked in the Assembly of the People, Assembleia do Povo, in the 90s, in the 80s, and we had the Assembly of People, and people had an educational process, a very good one, by the way, to have the relationship with the authorities. And they didn't have any feedback. So the distance between the people, the citizens, and the authorities, it was being done as an educational process to say we can have a governance of the city as well. It was a step-by-step process. And with the labor power, we had a very important role with this implementation based on this educational process in Campinas. And then you understood the process of litigations where you had the laborers, the labor part could be governed involving workers. And it happened. It was an experience that it was very important to guarantee to keep us in power. Because when you had Antonio da Costa Santos, the mayor, he was killed after we had the municipality in power. It was a tragedy. It was difficult. It was a very difficult experience to be overcome. And the participatory budget that I was the coordinator, and we had delivered in the first week of September. We had the budget for 2002, and the mayor, Toninho delivered this. It gave sustainability of the government. Because as I said, I was the coordinator of the participatory budget. So I could guarantee a government that it was very, very violent. And after 9 months, the mayor was killed, assassinated. And you don't know so far who did that. They were not punished. So
when I was the first woman not elected, but who continued, gave a sequence to this popular democratic government of the PT in Campinas, we hope. And we waited, and we're still waiting for women to be elected in succeeding government. They're not women, but there's almost no participation of women in administrative activities. So I want to follow here, and I want to be able to speak in the next half an hour. Maisa, can you move the presentation, please? So to generate this economic development model, not only based in financial indexes by social indicators, and with the goal to overcome historical inequalities, we found to retrieve the dignity of the citizens. We found this media, this environment in Belém, Porto Alegre, and here, 2 states of Brazil, were already developing. And as guidelines to embrace the economic, social, and cultural universe, 4 axes. First of all, the popular participation, democratization, and reform of the public power. Economic and social development. Not only the economic development favors, and not only favors resources in the territories for the social groups that mostly need it. It's important for the economic development. We may have the social movement development moving together. Territory and urban and rural development. Campinas up today has 50% of its area that is rural. And we have worked on this issue so that there be a common development. Fourth, social policies that may meet the basic needs of people. Transversal policies, it's important for the health policy, education, culture, and that we may have this transversal cut with women, the Black, and people with special needs, the youth, and the young, the LGBTQ+, the population living on the streets, immigrants, and other special needs as well. These 4 axes made us work to generate policies and have funding so that a democratic government would have, through this tuning with the Lula government started in 2002, popular participation channels through the participative budget, which is a method, as Jolie was saying, an organization that may promote dialogue and may promote inclusive education. More than the redistribution of the budget, the process, the educational process that may favor people to have a dialogue with the public power, not a dialogue of dependency and pursuit of one's own benefit, but a collective dialogue. So that works and actions can be for all activities. So this budget implemented since the first year of government created a transparent relation. And it was already mentioned that this is one of the objectives and the method and the form in which you discuss with the population really brings up politics, so people may have space to have a representation and social control to conduct the destiny of the city in which we're in. So the budget presented, discussed, deliberated 100% of the investment budget. There's a difference between the cost budget, which you have to maintain. You need to have the funds to pay people, employees, and services. But you also have, from this budget, you destinate what needs to be investment. The first year we were able to get 5% of the budget, and last year we had more than 20% for investments. So we were able to mobilize in the 4 years more than 100,000 participants in this municipality of 1,200,000 people. The construction of the adopted methodology for the participative budget was presented and debated with leaderships of social movements, of segments, and we divide the municipality into 18 regions as it had been divided previously. We used this administrative division of the territory, and the municipal boards that already existed, they were 22, and we ended up with 27 boards. At a first moment, we reached, just to build the proposal, 1,081 people participating in the debate for the proposal, which was really had to do with the sensitivity of the people living in the periphery and people who participated in the movements. And we developed this in articulated movements. The first one was the summoning for popular assemblies per region. After that, the topics: health, social services, management, education, culture, sports and leisure, economic development, transversal policies for women, for the Black, for people with special needs, the elderly. As I was presenting in the beginning, these assemblies, these initial assemblies, allowed a broad knowledge of the demands of the municipality, a broad knowledge of the 22,000 participants. 2,445 people were elected to compose the representatives forums the themes and regions. One elected for each 10 people present in the assembly. So the process that we understood may guarantee democracy. Second step are the assemblies that are intermediary. They were organized by those who participated in the forums of representation. The technicians, the people who were already implementing the budget, worked with the representatives in forums that discussed which were the needs and the demands in the territory or the place where people were taking part. Third axis, the second round of popular assembly. So what happened? This was placed in reports showing the needs. And after that, there was a second round of popular assemblies at the moment of the presentation of the priority demands indicated in the forums and the election of people to build the municipal board of the participative budget. In the territory and more specific demand thematic assemblies, we were able to gather 19,000, almost 20,000 people in the process. Fourth axis for the participation. I said 4, but they're 5. The citizenship caravan was to join the representatives elected, people who had been elected and other people who could, a caravan of one day, one weekend, to know other needs. This is a process that was very, very important because there are people who live in one neighborhood, one territory, know nothing about what happens on the other side of the city. To spend a day with the representatives elected by the population and people, the technician, the elected, who were obliged to know these needs better. It was very important. Mutual learning process that was very important. And the definition of the investment plan. And then we had the people who had more knowledge of which were the needs, that so they could decide better how to apply the resources vis-a-vis the major needs. In the first year, this was very important to see this collective education. It was really a process that helped. And we have in Brazil a dependency, and I say there is because there was a regression and it continues. We continue. We needed people to participate in the process. Few participate. When the population started to move their proposals or transmit their proposals to the municipality, the city representatives had this work of having to know better. This methodology guaranteed eventually. So eventually the execution of what I'll put it more in terms of perspectives and challenge. So the board of the participative with deliberative power, the first representative we had in Campinas, the government who won the elections after us, the first thing they did was they removed this deliberative from the board and left it only as a consultant. This removes the main aspect, which is democracy. These 100 councils are responsible to decide and follow the execution demand. Not all demands were included, but as of the control and the participation of what was going on, people also pursued other forms to realize other demands. What was in the budget, what was in the year budget, it was deployed, and the order for the selection of what was priority. First, the priority order, the index of needs in the region, and the population to be benefited. The educational process that developed in practice with the interaction of participants with the technicians from secretariats and public service and representatives of the executive. So there was a getting together of people in like a demystification of what is a public administration, and also development of technical knowledge and political of the territory for decision making, and necessary to have mechanisms of communication to reach all the process, all the population, not only boards and representatives. All the material was broadly distributed at bus stops, at the endpoints of collected transportation. So to be a counterpart to a media that did not, an elite that did not accept this form of people getting empowered of what was public or a public administration. The perspective also became a challenge. So continuing with the development, today with the development of the virtual media and online consultation and democratization, participation more broadly, this issue as a challenge. Would it be possible to have an increase with a commitment of the participation of social control only through an online choice process? This interaction with people is very important to go on in time. These are one of the issues that were implemented, and this educational process of interaction was lost to guarantee the participative with the changes in government. So I believe that I learned with Anjuli, there are mechanisms today that are more embracing, more encompassing with President Lula now, and the commitment to have this participation for the payment of taxes also. We're going to organize the participation. I think we're going to be able to retrieve this participation in the instances of the federal and the municipal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Iselene. Thank you very much. And now we will have the third speaker, Ubiratan de Souza. He is an economist, former Secretary of Budget and Finance of the Participatory Budget of the State Government of Rio Grande do Sul, during the Workers' Party government under the governor Ovidio Duran. He is also a general coordinator of the planning office of the participatory budget of the municipality of Porto Alegre from 1993 to 1998. And is also during the Workers' Party administration of the mayors Tasho Jonot and Huao Pon. He is currently Director of Planning and Participatory Budgeting of the National Secretariat for Social Participation, SGP of the Lula government. Thank you very much, Urban Tan.
Good morning, everyone. In Brazilian time zone, and good afternoon, good evening to other time zone. It's a pleasure to be with you, sharing this experience of popular participation. We can see a popular assembly pictures. We have more than 3,000 people. So you see these assemblies taking place in Rio Grande do Sul. First of all, that I'd like to tackle, let's see the context we are facing in the world we are living and the importance of the popular participation. There is a crisis of political and fiscal legitimacy of the contemporary state. The liberal state that is from bourgeoisie and the current state neoliberal by the domination of the financial capital increase the process of social exclusion, stressing the failure of these compensatory policies in the resolution of the problems of the capitalist society. So together with the big multinational groups in the world economy, they have a policy that could be resumed, as Professor Ladila Gudo says, is the hegemony of the financial capital and the kidnapping of the democracy and the destruction of the planet. This is within this context to us, the countries that are under development and even the countries of the BRIC and countries that have a policy for the new globe that is multipolar based. This is a popular scheme of a left-wing democratic relationship with the society with the state, where you can have the participatory democracy in all public spheres, municipal, state, and federal levels. In the 16 years in which the popular administration had the government in Porto Alegre, it's good to point out that the first experience where we have the participatory budget, it was born in Porto Alegre, because the experience in the other areas of Brazil, it was just for consultancy. We had proposals and public consultations in Pelotas city, in another municipality of Santa Catarina, but at the end of the day, they didn't do anything. The mayor did what he wanted to do. But in Porto Alegre, you had this popular budget with a deliberation characteristic. And you had 4 consecutive government roles. We started in 99 until 2002. And we have the state government of the city of Rio Grande do Sul. In 1999 and 2008, you had a practice of a rich and successful process of co-management of the city between the city, the government, and the society. It was based on popular participation, the participatory budget as the core relationship, and you had the thematics and the sectorial councils, and you had the congresses of the cities to define and to accomplish public policies in a regional and general aspects of the city. It was more than participations to define the budget, but it was a co-management between the government and the society. The experience of the labor part and the popular front, the process of co-management was possible, and it was virtuous because you had the basis, three important variables, fundamental variables. This concept is very important because you have several levels of federal participation. Based on the experience of Porto Alegre, it was spread out in Brazil. But I had always a question. Is it going to be okay to have a participatory budget to be in my city, whatever it is, in Latin America, Europe? And I said, yes, you have to take into account three fundamental variables. You have to have the political will of the governor, the leaders, to truly share the power with the society, to reorganize the structure of the government with a social relationship cabinet, with this relationship with the society, and the planning and budget agency to have within the process the two legs of the participation, the relationship with the society and the budget, the public budget that must be within the process. And in this process, we are going to have the political eager to deliver this participation. The other point, the organization of the society with the capacity of mobilization, claims, to have demands and autonomy. And the combination of the political will and the organization of the society, you have a process that is effective in terms of co-management of the state between the government and the society. It is very important because depending on the level of the political will, we are going to have a more virtuous process or less virtuous. This is a dialectic process. There is no formula, and it depends on the relationship between the government to really share the power with the society and the organization of the society with the autonomy and the capacity of mobilization. Let's go ahead. And we have principles that are crucial in the universal experience. For that reason, that this experience of Porto Alegre became global. First, direct participation of the society in a volunteer and universal manner with the deliberative characteristics in public assemblies. What I mean by deliberative characteristics, the proposals that are coming from the society that the government formatted in terms of technical criteria, legal criteria, and resources, the proposals that the society put to be observed and analyzed must have a vote. And the result of the voting, we had a software to have the results of it. And you could see the hierarchy of the themes, and within each theme, the hierarchy of the demands. This is planning all about, participatory planning. And then you could have a plan of investments and services to be accomplished in 1 year time. It was agreed with the popular participation with the resources available. The other point is the regulation of the process. In Brazil, you don't need laws because the federal constitution in the first article in the unique clause says that all the power comes from the people and they will have representatives for that, but they have to have a regulation. So the process must have a methodology of prioritization and hierarchization of the actions that was decided in assembly. You have to have delegates and you have to have the selection among regions. So this assembly is done by the government and the society that can be improved year by year. And the third element of the discussion is the totality of the budget, the public budget and the public policies. So when we have the investments, or when you talk about services that are the end of this pipeline of services that is there in the area of education, in other areas, it must be shown to the population so the population can understand that the public budget, besides the investments that would be new investments in public policies in the education area or in the social area or in the assistential area, whatever, you have to have this decision made previously that must be fundamented in the budget. For that reason, we need to have this fiscal reform, so the rich people, you pay more tax to pay for the public budget for the society. So you have to have this plan of investment and services within the assemblies and within the resources available in the programs, and according to the priorities, you are going to have a plan of investments to see. These are projects that are under construction. These are from the regional area, and you are going to have accountability at the end of the day together with the government. We have to go ahead with the slide, please. That's it. The other fundamental principle is the solidarity in the management of the citizen awareness, in the planning, the democratic planning, and the preservations of the rights of the minorities. So this is what the former mayor of Campinas said, is to have the caravan to visit a region. It creates the solidarity of the majorities with the minorities. This is a process of preservation and the right to minorities with this citizenship awareness. And you can have the democratizations of the legal relationship. So when you had the state government with Olívio Dutra, our first mayor in 1989, many people said that it was not possible to have the participatory budget in a municipal level, but you did in a state level as well. We did that in the state sphere, and he increased his power over resources in the budget and extra budget, because you had a bank of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, a public bank that give this sustainability with the development bank, national development bank, so you could have the participatory budget. And you did that with the health, education. We increased this extra budget as well, and you had the legal competence to work with the public policies in a macro social perspectives. So I will give an example to you. The state dimensions, we had some infrastructure development undertaking. You had thousands of people in these municipalities of the state of Rio Grande do Sul to have a state university of Rio Grande do Sul. We had this as a priority, and it's there working forming new generations in a superior level, in our university level. And this was a decision made to extend the education to rural areas. So besides public infrastructure development, we had educational infrastructure development. We have today the assistance, financial assistance to poor people called Bolsa Família. We did that in that time as well. So you can go back a bit, please. This is the state experience that allowed us to qualify the relationships between the state government with the municipalities, because it was not a question of have a godfather. No, it was decided in the participatory budget and the law of the secretarial councils, agriculture, housing councils, so they could have public policies coming from these participatory budgets. As we had all this journey from municipality to state, now we have the government of President Lula. We are going to do this experience that you had in the state. We have a federal experience. We have 218 million of inhabitants with 4,570 municipalities and 27 states. So in 2023, in April, Lula started a social participation of these participatory PPA that we are going to have from the program of governments that we had democratically with the election of the president, the vision of the future, guidelines, programs, objectives, and goals of the government for 4-year time. The PPA, the pluriannual program that will be delivered in the 31st of August in the National Congress, it's a medium plan, a medium time plan that will give all the guidelines to the law of budget, national budget. So we have 3 instances of decision. We have inter-council forums. We had one that it was in April, 18th and 19th of April. We are going to have another one in June. And this third will be before 31st of August. The 3 councils are composed of all the representations of national and secretarial councils connected to the themes of the ministries. And you have the National Council of Social Participation. You have MST of the Worldwide Women March. We have People Without Fear, the unions. This is the proposition of the forum. In the other instance of decisions, you have the state plenaries done face-to-face in Brazil. And the digital platform. This is the great breaking through that you have, the digital platform. We overcome this territorial challenge. And it happened, as I said, we started the process with the social participation in the first forum in April. And this was the first phase that you had the kickoff of the process.
In sequence, on the 11th of May,
we had
with
the presence of
President Lula.
We had in
excuse
in
me,
Bahia.
yeah, and I think Jacqueline will take over, right?
And we had On the 11th of May, we had the inauguration of these presential plenaries in Bahia on the 11th of May, and it's going to end on the 14th of July in the state of São Paulo. And the PPA will have 27 presential plenaries and a digital platform where the Brazilian citizen may present proposals and prioritize programs. And it will be an important moment for debate, but it does not close because the digital platform in a set of municipalities that have a federate entity. So as the platform, and together with this, the social movements will be able to organize in their municipalities and or presential meeting, free meetings, programs, so that IT is not a political subject, but an instrument that is facilitator of political and social relation. With this, we will be increasing the direct participation presential of citizenship beyond the state plenaries, reaching municipalities that compose territorial bases. So I'm closing now. It will be a dialectical process of learning where social movement, popular topic and sectorial boards and the government will experiment in creating new and varied mechanisms of direct democracy and participative planning, strengthening the organization and popular movements. The struggle against social exclusion demands public policies that may modify the distribution of resources between region, state, municipalities, and making concrete the forms of participation, direct participation, the population, and public management. The PPA and national participative budget bring with them great values. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm at your disdain with a phrase of a citizen of a popular region in Porto Alegre. She lived in non-paved with no services, no utilities. What was her feeling today with sewage and rain channeling? At this moment, I can say I'm going to paint my home, make a garden, and buy new shoes.
Thank you very much, Ubranto. And I would like to invite Professor Rogerio from University of Espírito Santo to answer some questions. So Rogerio, please.
Good morning to all. Hello to my Brazilian colleagues and from other parts of the world. It's a pleasure always to collaborate with Chinese colleagues, the construction and alternative paradigms. I would like to congratulate the presentations, which were very rich and show experiences that are very successful debating the reconstruction of democracy in Brazil, particularly refers to the budgets, which perhaps is one of the most hermetic, mostly closed issues, is popular participation. I prepared not exactly questions, but some topics for further debate until Renato Simões will arrive. I started on the chat. Congratulations to Anjuli for a great presentation. Could you talk more about the coup of 2016? Was there a social participation of the budget? I think the three presentation identified that we had a great regression as from 2016 with Mr. Michel Temer and Jair Bolsonaro, and also regression in experiences that had opportunity, especially state of Porto Alegre, for example. This is a new fiscal regime. This really restricted the potential of the public expenses. Another issue, as from the challenges that you presented, the budget has an hermetic language, not oftentimes not accessible to the large public. The practice of participative budget needs an education of the public. When we think about the schools, do you think it's interesting to have classes on the topic of how the public budget works, having to encounter all the experience on taxing? We know that the public and private schools, we have financial education classes, but mentioned in a perspective that is very individual. The finance perspective of fundings. So in some classes, you have the bourse, the stock market, the awareness of this is, we have a very important content, and we should consult the Ministry of Education. First of all, Professor Zaleni, at the time Professor Mayor Toninho was murdered, I was a student in Campinas. I voted on Toninho, made a campaign for him. And I can say to you that Mrs. Zaleni took on the city government very unfavorable. This is Brazil, where a legitimately elected mayor, popular character, was murdered in a large Brazilian city. In this context, Mrs. Zalina developed a great job. I have to register this. And I testified this as a student. Having said this, Alim, first of all, congratulations for your courage and the work you developed. You say that the participative budget help relations between executive and legislative. Another curiosity here, more than a question. How politicians, more conservative, how do they react to this democratic practice? In fact, this reaches the practice, the clientelist practices that were with the population. You also talked about the investments. I asked if precatories and financial and payrolls, if they were also presented to the population in a way that citizen could have a dimension of how the payment capacity is oftentimes compressed by other public expenses. That is a vision of the totality of the budget beyond investment. And to Ubiratan, I would like to escape the experience of Porto Alegre, but I want your professional experience at a federal level. And we know that there's a sequestration of democracy. And one of the characteristics is the financial dominance. The author as the market, they work with the perspective of the privatization of Brazilian public finance. The public finance, where today you find them dominated by financial interests. Vis-a-vis this characteristic, the popular participation becomes more and more strategic, however, very much fought against. I would like to hear a bit more. You touched upon this point, but do you see any possibility of increasing the popular participation, starting with the government Lula? Can we close the financial clientelism circle and direct treasury, for example? Would it be possible to break the practice of the secret budget? The period Temer-Bolsonaro really dismantled the tripod that you presented. There was no political will. They disorganized social movements and established a non-efficient management. The challenge, I would say, the increase of the participant budget is a great challenge, but we don't know much about the possibilities of the future. These are the issues I would like to present to the three speakers, and I thank for the richness of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rogerio. And I would like to invite the Marisa to read out the questions and comments in the chat room. Marisa, please.
The participative budget is an educational ideology, and it has to do Paulo Freire's ideas to be able to recover education. Isolini should explain the pedagogic effect of the pedagogic caravan. Thank you, Benedito Ferraz. And a comment from Maria Camargo, making compliments to Ferraro. Very happy you remember Professor Paulo Freire.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think Hernando hasn't be ready, right? So maybe Anjuli, Isolini, and Ubiratan, please respond to those questions and answer.
I can start answering the questions that were very well made, Professor Rogério Faleiros, straight to crucial topics in terms of the effectiveness of participation. As we put it in the presentation, a very important element is the organization of the institutions for the participative budget. It was showed by Ubiratan in the presentation of Isolini. And it's something that we haven't seen the last, as from 16. I bring something deeper, but only the budget, the logic, the participative budget, because this happens at a federal level.
The search of these democratic accomplishment with this democratic state of right. This is very difficult because it was not taken into consideration one time in our life of Brazil, and you lost the track of platforms, dialogue, roundtables. A lot of mechanisms were destroyed, extinguished. We have a mechanism of planning as well that we can. The Ministry of Planning was extinguished when they had the super duper Ministry of Economy. And we had the incorporation of the Secretariat of Planning as a subsecretariat of the Ministry of Economy. So it was a subordinated in this sense. And they discussed the extinction, the plan, pluriannual plan, as I mentioned, it was almost extinguished. This is the main tool of planning in a medium-term basis of the federal government. So this demobilization of the social participation, the democracy as something that could be deactivated. What we are doing now, we are restarting, we are reactivating the tools, and there is a survey with many articles published recently in March in 2023 within the Bulletin of Political Institutional Analysis by IPEA and CEPAL, two agencies of the government. They show the problematic of the weakness of the planning, the social participations in the executive power. That was the social participation being compassed and taken into account. There is an article that has a consultation recommendation, and there was another movement that it was the legislative growth in terms of decision-making of the budget. So we were talking about the budget in a national platform level. This is the next step, the next process to be achieved in this deactivation of the social participation that it was before and now is being reactivated in a federal level, this social participation. And in the past, we had this secret budget instead of participatory budget. So we have to have the guideline of this budget. We had the Bolsonaro government, so the amendments of the legislative deputy was more important than social participatory budget decision making. We have José Celso, that is researchers from the Federal Public Administrations. He is doing this survey about the impacts of these resources of the projects that are very important for the citizenship and collectivity. It's important to point out this in our agency, in the union relevance. We have the social participations that we had a lot of debates, dialogues with the society. We had a transparency in our performance. The law to access information, it was important to have a collective construction towards the civil organization demands. So the last government, it was not the priority at all. But this is past. So just to answer your question, so this is not something that is completely sad. we are working to restart, and there is a publication that is updated. I recommend you to read about the subject. Regarding the second point of your question, it is the budget discipline. So how can you organize? How can you insert these in the budget? This budget in the curriculum of the schools, the social participation, the federal budget. So how they all work? What all these names and acronyms, what they mean? And this is interesting. This is language that must be understood. We have to dialogue about it. You have about that. You have to include the students in this dialogue. We have an experience that is very interesting, an experience of Portugal in 2017. Created a law, actually, is to have a national legislations where you have the participatory budget in the public schools. This is mandatory. It was in Portugal, this experience. This initiative multiplied, it is mandatory. Now they have 11,500 participatory budgets. So the Europe is ahead from the Latin America because of these initiatives in Portugal. And the students, the way that the students do, they work together. They have this pedagogical participation, as Paulo said before in his studies. So instead of have a banking education, we are going to have a transforming and popular educations that can empower the democracy. That is what you want to make sure it is in place. And I bring again this concern. I put this in order to include in our dialogue with the populations, indigenous populations, traditional populations that most of the time I cannot understand the language. The way that the bureaucracy works is difficult to be understood by this population. So you have to dialogue with them with a clear intention, so we can take into account the way of life and bring them to a dispute of paradigm. This is something that you have to have in place in this very moment. The dispute of paradigm that you shared today, that is the Western capitalist paradigm that is destroying our planet. We need to study a paradigm to empower the participatory tools or the social tools to translate the power that the indigenous population bring to construct the planning in a federal levels, municipal levels, and state levels. So the public services, public policies that will impact directly the collectivity. Thank you for the questions. I hope I have answered all, or give some contributions to reduce the gaps.
Thank you, Anjuli. And please, Iselene.
It's interesting to interact when you talk about an issue, as Anjuli said. In my presentation, for example, in 2012 until 2018, I was living in indigenous community in Alto Solimões, in the border Brazil-Peru and Colombia. And there we understand, and you have bad news where you had Bruno assassinated and on. I had many questions in relation to, for example, family assistance to indigenous people. I think that is very difficult to go from the village to the city to have these the money from the bank and the relationship of purchasing, what they do with the money, it's very difficult. So I'm taking this time to interact to say that there is a team of the government and family assistance must be different from indigenous people. The participations of indigenous people must have a relationship that is more the exchange manner, you know, goods exchange, not money, the coin, currency, just to make sure it is clear. You know, you have to make a point because I thought that it was a concern that I had in that time. So what Rogério said, thank you, Rogério, for your question, because I think it's very important to talk about the relationship with the executive. I'm not saying that it was easy, not at all. But what you could achieve, the government of Toninho, when I was there working together, you would have 10 places that the municipal deputies to get from the administrations to reduce to 2 instead of 10, 2, but didn't change the way that they did these negotiations with the municipal deputies. So the first budget that Toninho had in the first week of September, it was followed by 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people. And if you know Campinas, the chamber was very small in the building of the executive power. It was difficult. And it impacted. So you have the visit of the caravan of citizenship. Because the caravan was going to places that were the clients of the municipal deputies. And they were invited to participate in this visit, citizen visit, I would say. So in the first year, they didn't make a presence, but then they have this importance and they started to occupy the space. In the first year, we didn't have a total discussion of the budget because you had a learning process for the managers, the process that you develop the participatory budget. So in the first year, we didn't put out the budget because the first day of a government, we didn't have the notion of what you would find on the way. So you couldn't present the budget straight away. But in the second year, we started to present the budget as well as discuss it with the participations of the public servants that wanted to have more salary increase. So how could you have this relationship? So it is an educational process that we started to do, to put into practice. So now the federal government is going to this annual pluriannual plan, because it is educational and you have the need to have a planning, a participatory planning. And you are going to include the people altogether. I am really fond of this approach. Just to give an example of Hermetic languages. So when I had to give an interview to the press that they really wanted to just characterize the planning and this characterize myself, I say, what about you, social assistance? What do you understand about financing? And I said, in first place, we are not discussing the budget to make the benefits at the end of the day, but to share. That is the way. As social assistants, I always had a salary, and I knew how to share my salary to buy to sell to really pay for my accounts. So I knew how to do accountability. This is a sharing perspective, not accumulating sharing and do financing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Iselene. And we are very glad that Renato joined us. And I will introduce you, and then you do your presentation. And Renato Simões, he was a state deputy for the Workers' Party in São Paulo for 3 consecutive terms from 1995 to 2007. For the past 10 years, he chaired the Human Rights Commission of the Legislative Assembly of the state of São Paulo, created from a project of his authorship in 1995. In 2013 and 2014, he was a federal deputy for the Workers' Party in São Paulo. In the government of Dilma Rousseff, he was a special advisor for social participation in the General Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic and the Government Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic. He is a member of the National Directory of Workers' Party, where he has served on the state executive in São Paulo and the national executive and chaired the municipal directory of Campinas. At the National Secretariat of Social Participation, he is responsible for the creation and articulation of Institute for Consultation and Social Participation and for the development of research on the subject. Besides the implementation and coordination of the Intercouncil Forum and the integration between National Council, Ombudsman and Conference. So thank you very much, Renato.
Thank you very much. Welcome you all. We have the responsibility to have the social policy. It is participatory, and you have the Secretariat of Social Participations. And one of the initiatives that you have of the Secretariat is to bring the process of social participations to the budget cycle. In Brazil, it's composed of 3 legislation. The law that all the governor is obliged to show is the pluriannual plan that establish the priority. It was a mandate of 4 years. We are doing the preparation of a pluriannual plan to 2024 to 2027, and the President Lula will give it to the Congress in the 31st of August this year. This plan has the big goals and objectives that Brazil needs to achieve in 4 years' time. And this plan guides, so to show, so you have this pluriannual plan, and you take next year the process of organizations in the social participations in the annual plan of participation of the country. It means that we are in a challenge to integrate the social participations in the territories. Brazil, you know, it's a continental dimension country as China. You have 27 states that are units of the confederations with their own pluriannual plans. And they do the social participations in their state processes. So we have 3 big initiatives of social participation. The first one is traditional. all the years in the left-wing governments, Lula and Dilma, we had the social participations in the pluriannual plan through the national councils. They were sectorial councils elected by the populations, and they have a part of the civil society that is part of the forum that is inter-council forums. Besides that, we have other modality of participation. We have the intercouncil forum, and you have the third one, that is the disclosure of the process of law that we've given to the Congress.
We have already started 8 of these days. We're going to have another 3 this week. The Ministry of the Secretary General, Minister Marcio Macedo and Minister Simonita organized plenaries with entities of the civil society in each state of the country, with the objective of stimulating and that these states may replicate in their territories, joining municipalities that live the same reality in territorial plenaries. This social participation has the purpose of reaching the territory where people live, where people work, where people build their identities, which is something new in the attempt of the federal government to innovate in social participation and reach as close as possible the popular participation. The federal government added a third initiative. So the interboard councils, presidential plenaries in states and territories, and one third initiative, which is the platform Participative Brazil. It's a digital platform whose purpose is to receive the proposals of the population through prioritization of programs that the government is presenting. Among the government process, this a voting process for the priorities of these programs. And in the same way, each citizen can propose 3 initiatives for the different ministries that have to do with the concretization of public policies that are foreseen in the PPA. This platform has today, it's been functioning for 10 days now. It has already 1,700 proposals presented by the population. We have votes that we have already reached 100,000 votes for the proposals. So now we are stimulating the social participation through this digital platform. It's something very innovative. We did not have any mechanism, digital mechanisms of the participation for citizens. This process in itself is already innovative, but it adds a characteristic that is limiting the fact that we have had during the last 6 years a government that emerged from a coup to a legitimately elected president in 2006 and represented an alliance in 2018 of neoliberals and neo-fascists that limited the social participation greatly. Many boards were extinguished. Most of the boards that were able to survive were neutralized or mutilated in their capacity for participation. There were no mechanisms of participation. In no way neither in the budget nor in the pluriannual plan. The limits we are facing to reach the territories, to construct a mass platform, the result of this dismantling of the public that had this excluding government to what Lula inaugurated in 1st of January. It is important that the PPA, the social participation, this pluriannual plan, may be the beginning of a cycle that will reach a federal public budget. There was never a participative budget with this dimension in the countries. So we have been developing our muscles in the PPA so we can design a methodology and a form relating to the civil society for us to reach in 2024 an edition of the participative budget, something unheard of in the country, with all the alerts that we have from the experience of Porto Alegre and Campinas, these experiences where there was a whole educational process for the participation, democratizing not only access to the vote, but really the knowledge about the budget, doing this in a scale that is almost continental. It's going to be a great challenge for the future. And this experience around a project, a smaller scale than the pluriannual, is being very rich for the federal government to be able to listen to society about what participation do they want in the budget. It's important for you to know that we have a National Congress with a conservative majority, and it's following the entire process. And there will be at some moment a negotiation that is necessary among the two powers, legislative and executive, for this to be institutionalized so that social participation promoted by the executive will be also respective and welcome by the legislative power. It's a challenge we have in the political area for social participation to be effective. So I would close here, and I thank you for the opportunity. We're very, very interested in this exchange so that we can also benefit from as many countries initiated their processes, starting with the experiences of Porto Alegre and progressive governments and the municipalities. So we in the federal plan can also benefit from other countries, other governments that have already established some effective mechanisms for the participation budget, participative budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renato. And before that, we have a section of question and answer. So maybe I will invite Ubiratan to respond to Rogerio questions.
According to what Rogerio Falheiros asking about public finance in Brazil and the articulation, the important that is the popular participation as a political strategy. And the questions he also raised also about the secret budget. The popular participation in reality, the parliament continues being an important element for the representative democracy. So we have, in terms of governability of the government, there's a dialogue with the parliament, but we preserve all prerogatives of the parliament. We have the possibility to have governability that goes beyond the Congress with public participation. So answering Rogerio's question, for you to have an idea about public finance issue, there's a project of tax reform that hasn't moved forward and is fundamental. We have a debate about the tax reform that can be more progressive, that can have higher taxes on direct on incomes, on dividends, and decrease the indirect taxes. For the tax reform, it needs great popular support also to back up this national reform. Another thing I was raising about the secret budget, the amendments from senators and congressmen in general, they were additions that were amendments that were not impositive. The government could dialogue and execute or not. But as from the process of Dilma's coup in 2015 and after that with Temer, it increased the impositive amendments. More than this, in the Bolsonaro government, we had the amendments of the rapporteur, which is called a secret budget. It was through an action in the Supreme Court. Minister Rosa Weber, Justice Rosa Weber, made it illegal and it was extinguished. It was something important, but the resources of these secret were distributed with parliamentary amendments. There's a debate here. We have the roof for expenditures, and the ceiling, about the hegemony of the financial capital, so that you can have an idea. The expenditure ceiling that was established by Tim, it allows the growth of the educational budget, only compensating inflation. It was violated. It was approved. It's breaking 2019 from 53 billion 2020. 507 billion in 2021, 117 and 2022, and 116 billion, which is adding all this. We have 790 billion. It's 1 trillion. This is a source. This information comes from Braidogos Fundação Getúlio Vargas. The new fiscal framework is a demand that is in writing there, but Bolsonaro, he broke this as much as he wanted. Governments, Lula and Dilma, always honored the services and the public debt. So fiscal responsibility in the government of Lula and Dilma always paid the debt service, interest and amortization. So there's no need of having this ceiling of expenses. The project that is in the Congress today, proposed by Minister Haddad, is a project that recovers. It has problems that have to be debated, but it guarantees that with the growth of 70% of this revenue can be compensated by the growth of expenses. In my opinion, we wouldn't need to have this in any way. US approved an agreement between the Republican and the Democratic parties in the US increases. So now we have, but we still have a debate on the fiscal framework, and the next government will have a proposal that will pass. So having this increase in the spending ceiling, only to contextualize and the popular population, as Renato was mentioning, it is fundamental. The pluri-annual plan is of 4 years, but it is executed in the budget of each year. So we need the participative budget, annual participative budget, within the limitations of 1 year, with the problems that we have there. And the digital platform is an extremely important instrument for us to guarantee the encompassing this popular opinion and the participation in the territory. And in case of this, we will have more conditions of having a debate of programs and actions with popular participation, which increases more than the PPA. The PPA is being successful, the 8 rounds or the 8 states that we saw in the Northeast of Brazil. We have seen a participation of 106,000 users in the platform, 119,000 votes in the platform, with interactions and with these meetings that are self-managed, that can be made in any place in Brazil until June. The fishermen or the riverside citizens in the Amazon can decide, and then presentially, and then they enter the platform and vote their proposal. This is the innovation and the great challenge. Government, President Lula has given this priority.
Thank you. And we have some questions from a Chinese audience, and I choose one for Renato, and I'll read out the question in English. Lula proposed for a single Latin American currency. Will it be a revival of the Bank of the South that Chavez and other leftist leaders promoted many years ago? And how can it achieve the effect of de-dollarization? And how does the participatory budget project, PPA, work together with this financial integration in Latin America? So, Renato, could you respond to the question?
So since the first government in 2018 that you had a big crisis in a global way, we have the reform of this multipolar with the new institutions, the reform of the National Board of the United Nations, and the World Bank reform, and there is a defense of the strategic changes when you had the crisis of 2018 in relations to the fiscal paradise, and defended the 20 creations and BRICS and the integrations of Latin America with Africa. These were mechanisms to empower the South-South perspective in the economy. It was not out of our debate the need to have a change in dollar standard in international relations. It corresponds to a correlation of powers post-war in the globe under transitions. But the proposal of Lula, President Lula, is to open the debate. It's in very embryo still. So you can negotiate among the countries without having the dollar as the transaction coin or currency. It was debating in BRICS and in the Mercosur. This is an embryo still. It's not a proposal of the Brazilian government. We don't have a standard international currency. No. There is a need to talk about that and to have a process of dialogue. This process has to start with the equal ones. For that reason, we are going to have this dialogue in the Latin American and BRICS. This is a way of organizations that the Brazilian government put all the driving forces to make it true. Is the case of Mercosur, UNASUR, and CELAC in the continental plan, and the relationship with Africa and mainly with BRICS. I believe that the president Dilma Rousseff, on behalf of the BRICS, we will open this dialogue about that. But the budget, the federal budget, the pluri plan in Brazil is one of the mechanisms of social participation, and maybe it's not related directly to with the debate in the level it stays, actually. But we will have to revisit the social participation in all levels. President Lula created 2 boards connected to them to assist the presidency in high level. The economical and social board, it was the big board in Brazil. That is a board that integrates different perspectives. In a company perspective, media perspective, university perspective. It is a board of social dialogue and a pact of positions. And they have the social participation board that is more comprehensive in a democratic field, a board of the stakeholders, the civil society, the social participations, that it was responsible for the program of the government. So to get back the board is a guideline of the President of the Republic. Each ministry has an assistance of social participations. You have the finance, the international relations ministry, so the social participation does not take place only in the ministries that they were connected to concrete delivery to the community, but all the ministries. And you have the expectation, the external politics, and can really, the external policy can really take into account. You can have a mechanism of social participation institutionalized. We are doing this with Mercosur, social and participatory, and you are doing this with the Forum of Amazon that is taking place in Belém. And you are going to have other mechanisms and instances in a multilateral basis that Brazil participates. The Brazilian government is demanding other governments in this sense. So all these events and institutions and UNASUR and CELAC that have this relationship with the European Union in the meeting of Belgium, you can have social participation in place. So we believe that the civil society in Brazil will participate intensively in these commercial and international relations with Brazil and other countries.
Thank you very much, Renato. And Rogerio has also some questions.
So in a position of a coordinator, I have a question for you, but before I have to say that we have 23 hours and 21 minutes, and you have more than 600 spectators in our roundtable in that country. A lot of people. So I have to be really straightforward. According to the report and the initiatives that are put into practice, They are inspiring and they make us happy about democratic construction and this social participation. However, what's really, considering that you are talking about an international public, so what was the dimension of the failure of democracy, the threats that Bolsonaro was the leader? What's bad things happened? How much you have to build to rebuild the democracy, to have the popular democracy in place? Where we have Chinese colleagues and other colleagues are join us. So what you have in this 4 year that passed, it was dramatic in terms of attack and the dismantling of democracy that happened in the public institutions and the popular participations in the government of Temer and Bolsonaro. So I'd like to hear from you about that. I would say that the devastation, the neoliberal devastations during these 6 years, it's severe, it's very severe. We are now destroying that. We did that in 4 elections, free and democratic. We had twice Lula and Dilma twice interrupted in the beginning of this century, the agenda of the lack of rights, the lack of sovereignty, the privatizations. That were the official philosophy of Fernando Henrique as the president. And the other countries followed the same paradigm, devastating rights, revoking protections, environmental protections. So Brazil, during 12 or 14 years, resisted this perspective. If the President Lula and the President Dilma couldn't deconstruct it, Brazil had a state in which the structure of service provider and conductor of the economy was preserved. Other countries lost completely this perspective. Even with the devastation from the former government, you have Petrobras, BNDES, Caixa Econômica Federal Bank, the universities, the federal universities. So you have an equity, a public equity with big networks of public service providers. So we took a lot of risk. If Bolsonaro was the winner in the last election, we would have a government of national destruction. And in this sense, it was very important to have the democratic victory. And you faced a government that had 300 billion of reais and benefits in the last months of the government to guarantee the election. So you took a severe risk in a macroeconomic perspective to really destroy the state, the national state, to provide services and the guidelines of the economy of the country. But these functions, they were really impacted. Even with the victory of the elections, you have 2 big risks in place. First, the permanent risk to defend the democracy. We had an attempt of a coup of state in January the 18th, that it was stopped by the institutions in real time. The president of the Republic and the Supreme Court, and with the chiefs of legislative houses. So the coup, the new fascist coup could be stopped. So we could have a change in the democratic field. So democracy is a core of concerns, and Lula, the President Lula, represents and defends democracy in terms of participatory input, because the relationship of President Lula with the National Congress, mayors, governors, and Supreme Court, they were democratic throughout 4 governments that they had in power. And President Lula is talking a lot about that. He said that you need to develop something that is in our Brazilian constitutions, that is the participatory democracy. President Lula recreate the ministry of this national secretariat. Minister Márcio Macedo, that is the chief leader of this, is in charge of a dialogue with the social movements to recreate the councils, the boards, to have the national conferences, to have the social participation, digital platforms, to go to the territories, to have popular committees and state regional boards in the public policy of the federal government. This is the first bias, more democracy, participatory democracy together with the representative democracy. On the other side, you have to have deliveries. That is a big difficulty because people elected a program, and the structure of this government that you have, it is completely different. In some cases, the opposite of what it was the winner in the election. We are going to have a provisory measure that recreated ministries, like ministries of indigenous people, the Ministry of Planning, because the former government extinguished this. All these ministries, you have 13 new ministries that President Lula created. They will be voted. They are at risk because the National Congress will decide for that or not. So I must say that the reconstruction is not to create superstructures, ministries, is to recreate the programs, is to do again the goals and objectives. This is what a pluriannual plan asks us to do it. So to have housing, to have the combat to hunger, to have the recovery of the salaries, to defend the environment. This is in the base. So the PPA, participatory pluriannual plan, is to recreate the programs, to make these programs, to have budgets, plans, to have a new budget, and then you can have public guidelines for social perspectives, functions as well. So you have to have a social content. You have to create to the society what the society vote for, to have the elimination of the poverty, mitigate the poverty, to eradicate the hunger, to really have employment, to defend the environment. These are the points of discussions in the participatory PPA. And the international presence, the international support is crucial. It's very important to realize that in many attempts of coup, the international solidarity was important to Brazil. The immediate recognitions of the President Lula by many states leaders in different nations could stop the coup. The same thing of January the 8th. So all these recognitions helped the democracy, the sovereignty of Brazil by the elections. And so we could reaffirm that. And you have now space for the Brazilian diplomacy. You had a chief of state of South America. So Brazil has international protagonists. You have a UNASUL, you're going to create SALAC again. You're going to establish sovereign relationships with our continent, with other continents, and it will trigger and will motivate the BRICS relations. So the nations that are so unequal in terms of relations can be compensated. All these investments of the Amazon Fund that is back, industry investments, commercial investments that are being rescued, they are back again because you want to normalize the relations with Brazil, with the globe. It was a ideological relationship with the international right wing that was above the sovereignty of Brazil. The former government was in that agenda. Now it's another one.
Thank you very much, Renato. And I will invite Anjuli, Isolani, Ubiratan. Do you have any comments and also response?
How would you like to renew my thank you for the institutions that make this event come true, all these debates, these discussions. It's clear to me that, and for you all that are in this webinar, that we want to have projects. And this is relevant to have the social participation, to have a democracy that has a high density democracy, a radical democracy that can bring people to have the population that are minority, that are marginalized, they can be taken into account in the participatory budget. And I would like to hear from you in the next moment. As Renato said, this is the moment that is very rich to have the international relations in extent of all the countries, South-South relations. And it can be a reference where you have participatory and deliberative democracy in a local level. And you have our participatory budget that you can have new technologies with this. And you can have a consensus
all this for us is very rich, and we want to continue learning and having this deliberative democracy in place. We can cover this debate and bring to Brazil the experience that you have built. I thank very much. I thank my colleagues who shared, and thank you very much. The process was very rich. Thank you to all who were here. I would also like to thank everybody very much. Thank Jade. I'm very moved by this possibility of being able to recover this possibility of participating democratically with the people. When Dilma, when they removed Dilma, when we finished the government, our sentence was, we are not going away. We are getting ready to come back. And we came back, didn't we? Not yet in Campinas, but we came back in a nation broadness, and it will reach. This is the hoping of Paulo Freire. We never give up. We don't have hopes to hope. We have hope to go after, to pursue and not leaving participation aside. My message with all this, thank you, is to do what you do, Jade. You run after. I admire you greatly for your manner that is light and pleasant, of making people coming in, joining, meeting, and doing. Thank you very much. That China may be our partners in this alternative path. Jade, I want to say goodbye. I have something else. I have to rush now. I would like to thank the pleasure and honor of participating with you, Marisa and Jade. Well, we have the opportunity to interconnect internationally, nationalist partnership. Popular China is a great nation, and together with Brazil and the BRICS has a policy of building a new multipolar world. We have the opportunity to respect the self-determination of the peoples and being able to have a development of humanity, the distribution of income, with the environment preservation, and our partnership in Latin America and with the BRICS, especially with Popular China, is fundamental, and we're together in this fight.
Thank you very much of all your excellent presentation. And now it's 11:45 p.m. in Beijing, and we have over 2,000 viewers on Bilibili platform. So thank you very much, and let us understand more the participatory budget in Brazil. And this is really relevant to our situation in China, because we also have the policy of common prosperity, and also have the policy of a rural regeneration. And so this is important that we will take the, both of us will take the force into serious consideration. So, and also to revive the spirit of South-South cooperation. Thank you very much again. And 1 month later, we will have the Brazil lecture series number 6 is about liberation theology. So thank you very much, and stay with us next time.